Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome to Daring Dialogues. I'm your host, Shantae Charles. Good morning to those of you who are coming in. I want to say happy Friday. It's getting ready to be the weekend for some. I know that some people work on the weekend, so I just say happy Friday. Good morning. Also want to say happy Mother's Day weekend to all the mothers in the world, all the mothers that will be watching today. I hope that you have a wonderful weekend, that you're able to spend some time with your family, with your children. I hope you get some rest and relaxation, that you're treated to something wonderful on this weekend. So today we are in our Finance and Wealth Building Friday, and we're going to hear a couple of pointers from some tools of Titans, and also we're going to look at what it means to ethno aggregate in Powernomics. Good morning. Good morning, Prophet Jonathan. Good morning. I believe Pastor Ben is in with us. Good morning, Vanessa. Good morning. Some of you, I don't know your first name. Good morning, Kathy Ray. Good morning, Samuel. So, if you are with us for the first time, please feel free to chat with us in the conversation box. We are here Monday through Friday, normally at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we cover all different sorts of subjects. So Mondays, we cover something to motivate you to start your week. Tuesdays, Teachable Tuesdays, we are in a series now about controlling our mouth, watching our mouth. Wednesdays, we are currently in a series for women on how to deal with mean girls and how to deal with catty, conniving women. Thursdays, we are in a theology series where we're talking about worldviews and world religions. And on Fridays, we are talking about finance and wealth building, with the understanding that wealth is not just your finances, all right? So after we move from the wealth where we're talking about business and finance, we are going to go to some other parts of what it means to be wealthy, such as your health, all right? So just want to let those who are with us for the first time know that this is what we do every single day, Monday through Friday. We are trying to have dialogue around different topics and expand your knowledge base, and also at the same time help you to, for those of you who have goals, right, of reading and expanding your knowledge base. This is a great place for you to do that because we're always reading something new and different. All right. So we're going to start out in Powernomics by Dr. Claude Anderson. And of course, we know that Powernomics is all about a national plan to get Black America viable, to get Black America economically stable, to get Black America on its feet economically, because we know in the way this country is particularly structured, if you don't have economic power, you don't really have power in any other sphere. You may have a little bit of political power, but as we have seen with the 2016 election, most of that is taken for granted, especially if you don't have the money to support and set up your own candidates who are going to act in the best interest of your people group, right? One of the things that we saw on this week, we saw a president of an HBCU not act in the best interest of its alumni and its current graduating class. Well, how was he able to do that? Somebody put him in power. And the fact that he would go against his student body to invite someone in that, quite frankly, doesn't have even a good understanding of HBCUs was a slap in the face to all of the students that were graduating. And it was a slap in the face to the alumni of the school. So I am curious as to how he's going to be dealt with once this is over, because for him, it was a grandstanding occasion, but if he remains the president of that university, I would actually be really surprised. So in other words, you have to put people into power that act in the best interest of your people group. And he was a very good example of what happens when you have someone who may be African American, but is still not acting in the best interest of your own people group. Okay? So Dr. Claude Anderson talks about this concept called Ethno Aggregation. Ethno Aggregation. And so we're going to read that, and then we're going to look at what is the implications of doing this for Black America. Ethno aggregation is best defined as the voluntary concentration of individuals and their resources around their ethnic or language commonalities for the purpose of improving their economic and political competitiveness. So that's why it's done. It is to improve competitiveness. All right? That's why it's done. The term ethno aggregation may be new, but the concept is not. It is a behavior pattern used every day by religious, gender, ethnic, and Spanish-speaking groups. So that's where we left off last Friday when we talked about this. Examples of ethno aggregation. Our society is replete with examples of how whites and ethnic groups aggregate for political and economic competitive advantages in the marketplace. Organizing begets group power. Somebody type organizing. Organizing begets group power. And if there is one particular thing that Black Americans are fought on in this country consistently, that is the ability to organize. When Black people get together and they start organizing, it's a red flag to white supremacist power structures. And it's almost like they say, Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. The Black people are coming to their senses, and they're actually starting to not fight each other, and they're actually forming alliances and groups that could destroy us. So organizing begets group power. Before the Black Civil Rights Movement, Europeans, English, Jews, Irish, Germans, and Italians used their togetherness as a social and economic foundation. American Indians or Native Indians have been successful in using their ethnic image and treaty rights to hold on to reservation lands and government subsidies. In recent years, they have enjoyed windfall wealth from their approximately 257 gambling casino permits. Newly arrived ethnic and language groups aggregate their resources to build political and economic communities such as Chinatowns. Put some hearts on the screen if you live in a city with a Chinatown in it. Chinatown you have Little Korea, you have Little Cambodias, you have Little Saigons, you have Little Vietnams, and you have Little Havanas. I know in Miami you have Little Haiti. So what he's saying is this is not something that is out of the norm for people to do. Of all the above, Miami's Cuban community in South Florida represents probably the most visible model of ethno aggregation in the country. Now, I am from Miami, and I have a lot to say about that, but I'm not going to say it on this show. I'll save that for another time. But I was there, and I was graduating when the Cubans really began to get a foothold into South Florida, and they really began to take over businesses. They took over banks. Then they took over government. And since then, Black America in South Florida has really had a hard time regaining economic control in South Florida. Good morning, Bespoke. And so we'll just go into what he's saying here. Cubans control the political and economic activities of South Florida, which has become their home turf. As they came into the country, they first rallied around their common language characteristics, and they voluntarily aggregated into the same neighborhoods and established businesses. They also, when they came there, refused to speak English. And to this day, if you go to South Florida and you want a job, you're going to have to know how to speak fluent Spanish. Next, they began to compete with non-members of their group. They took control of the politics, the schools, and dominated the language. They take pride in being a closed society. Yes, they do. If you are not Cuban and you cannot speak Spanish, you are pretty much excluded from their society. That's just the reality. They are very nationalistic and sometimes even push the rule of law. In political and economic terms, Cubans have placed a flag in the ground around Little Havana, Hialeah, and South Florida. From behind their Latin culture and Spanish language, they aggressively intervene in international affairs. They play a key role in Radio Marti, radio programming beamed directly at Cuba via satellite, for the sole purpose of erasing or interfering with Cuba's regular radio broadcasting. They have flown planes into Cuban airspace to drop leaflets and interfere with the Castro government. They have rallied around common characteristics, pooled their resources, and improved their economic and political standing. Cubans in South Florida require those who come into their area to play their game by their rules. Exactly what I said. Within one generation, Cuban immigrants economically and politically subordinated black Miamians and became a political challenge to whites throughout the state of Florida. And so what happened when I lived there, South Florida was predominantly white and European Jew, with some Caribbean people mixed in, with some of the ex-slaves from Georgia came down into the area that we know as South Florida. My family was a part of the people who migrated from parts of Georgia into Florida. And so what you have now, as he was talking about, once they took control politically and economically, and you had to play by their rules, a lot of the whites in South Florida packed up and left South Florida, and they headed for places like Sanford, Florida. They headed for Orlando. They headed for Jacksonville, Pensacola, Panama City, Tallahassee. So a lot of the white people who originally lived in South Florida said, we're getting out of here. So they had their white flight around the early 80s. Okay, and they moved up into northern Florida territory. And if you live in Tallahassee, you know what I'm talking about. So, so the white people who lived in South Florida migrated further up Florida away from what was happening in South Florida. All right, they were like, we're not going for this. We're not taking this. The Caribbean people remained, so there are still lots of Haitian, Trinidadian, Jamaican, Bahamian, Virgin Island people in South Florida. Okay. And then some of the Jewish community is still in South Florida in pockets, but not as big as they used to be. All right. So that's what happened. Arab immigrants in and around Detroit are probably the second best example of ethno aggregation. They began coming into the country at about the same time as Cubans in the late 1960s. And like Cubans, they ethno-aggregated to such an extent that within a 30-year period, they totally subordinated blacks in select cities and have begun to challenge the majority white society for both wealth and power. Approximately 275,000 Arabs immigrated to the Dearborn, Michigan, and Detroit areas initially. In that short time period, Arabs built the largest, wealthiest, and most powerful political base outside of the Middle East. So, I've heard a lot of people talk about Detroit, Motor City, and Dearborn as basically Little Middle East. So that's what he's referring to. They invest their profits to build more businesses in black communities. They almost exclusively hire their own people and refuse to buy from black businesses. Black Detroiters serve as a large concentrated consumer pool that Arabs use to enrich themselves in their countries of origin. So again, it's this principle of buy within your own community, but be willing to sell to any other community. That is what they are practicing. So they will sell you goods. They want you to be their consumer, but they will not hire you. And they will take your money and put it into their countries of origin. That's the same thing that was happening and is happening in South Florida. The Cubans there will receive you as a consumer, but whatever monies they make, they're actually sending it back to their families in Cuba. All right? For the ones that they want to come over. Detroit is an 82% black city. Think about that. How are you 82% black city, but most of the businesses in your community are Arab owned and they won't hire you? So when we talk about what are some of the problems facing black America, one of the main problems is everybody wants you to be a consumer, right? But now you have a high unemployment rate in black communities because these same people who want you to buy their products do not hire you. So how are you supposed to move ahead if you're only seen as a consumer and not someone who can contribute to the workforce? All right? Think about that. Because we love to talk about the unemployment rate, but we're not talking about why the unemployment rate is so high. How are you supposed to get a job if these businesses are in your neighborhood and they won't hire you? Does that make sense? According to an article in the Detroit newspaper, Arabs who constitute less than 1% of the city's area population, listen to this, have taken control of 90% of the city's gas stations, grocery stores, party stores, discount strip malls, and medical supply businesses. Remember last time we talked about making sure that you begin to control resources that are life necessity based. Water, energy, gas, food, right? So they're telling you they are less than 1% of the population, but they control 90% of the city's gas stations. That's a necessity. Grocery stores, food is a necessity. Party stores, discount strip malls, medical supply businesses. So out of the 5 I just mentioned, you have 3 that are a necessity in American society. Gas, food, and medical supplies. According to the article, Arab businesses were so profitable last year that their owners sent $69 million back to their homelands to help Arabs who were fighting with Israel in the Middle East. So they came over, got businesses. Many times the government gave them loans because the government does give loans to foreigners faster than they will ever give one to black America. So they got loans, some of them. Some of them came with oil money, started their businesses, profit off of the consumer, and they send that money back to their countries so they can keep fighting wars. This drain of capital weakened black Detroit, but it strengthened the developing Arab communities. So if we want to know why they keep having the funding that they have in order to fight, you're contributing to it. Once Arab immigrants aggregated and concentrated their resources in and around Detroit, they increasingly used their acquired economic power to obtain local political power. Arabs know that politics follows the money. In this regard, it was reported that when Al Gore, the vice president of the U.S., visited Detroit in the summer of '99, he chose to meet with the top 100 Arab businessmen, not the black political leadership. Arabs pledged heavy financial support to Gore. Listen, in return for their financial pledges, they asked for greater business opportunities in black Detroit. Arabs are now in the phase of ethno aggregation, where they are beginning to use the wealth and power they acquired from blacks to politically and economically subordinate black people. To shore up, protect, and give credibility to their ethno aggregation, Detroit Arabs hold street festivals and encourage blacks and whites to attend. They engender pride in their own people by promoting their culture, their religion, and language, while masking over the economic competitiveness that they are conducting against blacks in Detroit. It is their ethno aggregation that gives Arab immigrants their competitive advantages over black Americans. They use their cultural togetherness to compete for economic and political resources. Even though Arabs may have religious differences with Jews and some Christians, they are still classified as whites and receive the advantage of a higher level of social acceptability than blacks, because we know in this economy, whiteness is an economic commodity. Arab immigrants use their ethnic advantages by remaining an identifiable, non-assimilated group politically and economically linked into a national and international network. All right? So they do have some. How do they have some advantages? Number one, they have a home country. They have a home base. They have, as he said here, they remain non-assimilated. They're not interested, as Black America is, they're not interested in assimilating. They like being different. They want to stand out. They're not interested in assimilating politically with people who don't have their best interests at heart. So I hope that we are understanding the power of ethno aggregation. He just gave you two really good examples: Cuban Americans and the Arab immigrant community in Detroit. All right. So finally, what are the implications for Black America? What does this mean for us? What can we learn from it? Arab immigrants in limited ways can be a powerful example to blacks who have integrated out of black neighborhoods. Arab immigrants see clearly why they ought to ethno aggregate and remain culturally and financially connected to their own people and their own power base. Blacks, on the other hand, have been continuously weakened by events from the diaspora, slavery, Jim Crow segregation, and integration, all of which have made blacks a scattered group. The ethno aggregation paradigm is specifically designed to shore up the weaknesses created by involuntary scattering of black people. Power itself always exists in concentrated forms. The application of ethno aggregation will create mindsets that provide incentives for black people to learn to pull together, to concentrate our power resources and compete with various ethnic minorities as well as majority monopolies. With the mindset of ethno aggregation, we will begin to have more control over our own fate, regardless of what the majority society decides. One way to explain ethno aggregation is to view it as a form of voluntary separation, just like Little Italy or Little Greek Town. More specifically, ethno aggregation signals that we as black people have gone the full route of integration and found it lacking. Now we want to pull back and voluntarily interact with members of our own community. Actually, our greatest competitive advantage rests in being neither integrated nor forcibly segregated. Jews, American Indians, Latinos, Asians, and Arabs have the option to assimilate, but have chosen instead to remain separate institutions, organizations, and communities. Like them, we as Black people need the same option to have, own, and control our own institutions, organizations, and communities. Our first step to group empowerment is to develop communities in which to practice ethno aggregation. Blacks are the only group in America that do not have communities. And we're not talking about ghettos. We're not talking about walled-in government housing. We have residential neighborhoods, okay? Those are not communities. Decades of integration caused an exodus of middle and upper middle class professional Blacks. I know this to be true because when I grew up, there was the Black community in South Florida, and then within the Black community, there was the ghetto. But it was a Black community, right? There were homeowners in my Black community. All the businesses that I grew up around were Black owned. The nightclubs were Black owned. The corner stores were Black owned. The dry cleaners was Black owned. So I know what a Black community looks like. And within the Black community, we had 2 housing projects that were seen as the ghetto or the hood. But not the entire community was not the ghetto. All right? So what he's saying is the middle and upper middle class Black people began to move out of these communities to quote unquote integrate. They were the backbone of the community, but they began to integrate into the white suburbs, thus weakening the cohesiveness of earlier Black neighborhoods and making it difficult physically and psychologically to amass group resources. And as he said, yeah, that is where we messed up. We are still stymied. Under racial segregation, white indifference to Black communities allowed Blacks to have businesses and a sense of community. But while we could aggregate our resources, we were never allowed to use those resources to achieve a group goal or to function as fully independent and competitive communities. So, lastly, pooling group resources. The ethno aggregation paradigm creates a context within which Blacks can come together and share. In ethno aggregation within Black communities, every individual contributes to the group's pool of resources. Individually, Blacks may be poor, but even poor Blacks can contribute to resources that collectively benefit the group members. One may have only a cup full of beans, another may only have a few strips of bacon, another only carrots. Yet when the individual ingredients are collected, the group can make soup to feed itself or sell to others. This is the competitive advantage of a group. Black leadership, politicians, government officials, corporations, and marketing firms do a disservice to us when they support and recommend policies that disperse our resources and make us vulnerable to others as only a passive consumer market. So what is the goal? The goal is to not just be a consumer. This is why every Black person, if you are between the ages of 18 and 25, should be working on a business. Because we have some catching up to do. We have some rebuilding to do. A lot of our institutions were lost through integration. And I say lost through integration because America has never, ever, ever, ever really and truly integrated. It hasn't. If you look around, you don't have white businesses saying we want to integrate with black businesses. You only have black people saying we want to integrate with you. So the reality is we got a lot of, hey, come on over here with us and let's integrate. But that's not true integration. True integration means that both sides are benefiting. True integration means that you're coming into our community to buy from us, and we're coming into your community to buy from you. And if you look realistically, that has never happened. Yes, and I was going to get to that. We need a better, stronger mentality. Because we know that unfortunately, mass media has done an excellent job of psychological warfare on a lot of black Americans, to the point where you have black Americans turning on each other. And all the other cultures are looking at us like, as long as you all keep turning on each other, and as long as you all are not supportive of each other, and as long as you all are having infighting going on, it's going to be hard for you to pull together. So you don't see these other cultures, you don't really see them interjecting, right, into the infighting of black America. You know why? Because it's beneficial for them, for y'all to keep infighting. Hello. They're not going to step in your arguments about whether light skin is better than dark skin. Why do they need to get into that argument? They're not going to step into your argument about black people killing black people. You don't really see, unless it's to insult you, right? You don't really see other cultures talking about the need for black people to stop killing other black people. Even though it happens in other cultures, it's called proximity crime. But the point is, media pushes it as if it's only happening with black people, because those are the crimes that they report on. Those are the crimes that you see on television all the time. So it appears that only black people are killing other black people. But white on white crime happens every day. Asian on Asian crime happens every day, but it's not put out in the media as such. So you don't really hear people saying, if the red tie gang would stop killing the blue tie gang, and all of them got together and formed a business called the Come Together Gang and began to employ, exactly, and began to employ their skills that they already have into legitimate legal businesses, then you will see a change in your neighborhood, because nobody would be using guns to shoot each other. They'd actually be standing guard and saying, you're not going to keep bringing guns into our neighborhood for us to just pick up off the street and start shooting each other. See, that kind of talk would be a red flag for the powers that be, because they're like, wait a minute, they're not following our plan. You know, we leave train loads of guns in their neighborhood in random places. This is happening, by the way. We leave random boxes of open guns in their neighborhoods, and they're not buying into picking up the guns and going around and robbing people and utilizing the guns that we left in their neighborhoods. Something's wrong. Our plan does not compute. So, again, ethno aggregation, that's something that Black America needs to work on. And we also need to work on, as one of our commenters has said, we also need to work on our mindset. because if you're going to get together with people, you got to have the right mindset. You got to have a mindset that everybody needs to prosper, not just the people at the top. I know that's the American way, but we got to get away from the American way to back to everybody profits, everybody prospers, everybody benefits. All right. So this concludes the first half of our Daring Dialogues on today. We're going to come back with part 2, and we're going to be looking at tools of Titans and some business tips. All right. I'll see you back in 60 seconds.